Welcome back to the Commercial Real Estate Show. I'm Michael Ball. Today we're having fun talking about the restaurant industry. Please welcome my next guest. I have Tony Akly. He's president of Restaurants Consulting Group. He's been on the show with us before and provided great information, so we had to have him back. Tony, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We also have John Akly. He is a hospitality attorney, helps a lot of restaurants with their legal work, and he's with Akley Law Group. And if you notice the name change, yes, father and son. Thanks for joining us, John.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
You know, one of the things that we're hearing about is, you know, rising construction cost, both in building new buildings where we sell a lot of land to people, new buildings, and also in build out an office, and it has to be going up in the restaurant industry. What do you guys see?
Definitely, the cost of construction is spiraling every day. I mean, from material to labor to furnishing and even accessories for the restaurant.
And what are some price ranges per foot that might shock some new restaurant investors?
Yeah, it really ranges. You can do a restaurant depending on how much the landlord contribution. If you're doing from indoor, out, you know, inside, outside, whatever you're doing with the restaurant, it ranges from $150 a square foot to $450, $500 a square foot.
Wow, just for a build out.
Yes.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you guys do design and build and also consult for restaurants. You know, what are some tips for operators that are opening a new restaurant to work with architects and to work with builders? Are a few, maybe 2 top tips for them?
Started this design build trend back in the 90s, and it's becoming actually the way to go for the restaurateurs. We're bridging the gap and cutting the cost of any project because we're eliminating the middleman. We do the design build, we study the interior of the restaurant, we create the atmosphere, and they don't have to go through the bidding process. They're saving on time and saving on cost by going one stop.
That's helpful. And speaking of one stop, once they've picked out a location that they like, you can also help them with some demographics there, right?
Yes, most of our business come from brokers like you, and we meet with them when they start searching for a location, and we advise them and try to find out what are the complications with the site, what it's going to take to build it. We do the projected cost for the project before they even sign their lease, and we work with them to define what the landlord is going to give them, is going to cover the cost. Sometimes they think they're getting $50 a square foot, they're going to be able to build the restaurant. So we try to shed a light on the cost of the construction for them from the beginning.
What are a couple of the gotchas that are kind of common that restaurant operators should really watch out for when they're doing a new build out?
Really, they need to check on zonings, on limitations on what they can do with the exterior. If they want to do the exterior, what are the plumbing restrictions, whatever the landlord is providing for them, is it adequate to do a restaurant? Sometimes they think they can take any building and turn it into a restaurant without any complications and minimal cost. These are the things I need to look at.
And a lot of retail landlords now in shopping centers, they're looking for restaurants and they want the experience. They want to draw in traffic. Any tip for landlords to help them attract more restaurants? Is there anything you see some landlords do that maybe makes restaurant operators shy away?
Most of the landlords really are not, they don't use the right architects to design the spaces for a restaurant use. So that's the biggest challenge in many of the, especially in the high-rise building that's going on in Atlanta right now. It seems like they build these huge buildings, but they don't account for the restaurants that the landlord and the owners want to put into their buildings. So you end up the project costing twice as much as it should be because it didn't allow for restaurants from the start.
Yeah. So maybe bring in a restaurant architect with your original building architect to kind of design things right to begin with, right?
That will help a lot.
Yeah. Okay. And John, tell to us about leases and some of the things that you see if for a tenant or a landlord that they may want to watch out for in leases related to restaurants, because there's a lot more moving parts, right, in a restaurant lease than just a typical retail lease.
For sure. I think it kind of goes back to what he's saying. In the onset, when you get your lease, it's important for the tenant to look at what the landlord is providing and what the landlord's work is going to be. I see a lot of disputes between tenants that go in without their architect and without their contractor and lease a space, and then they get down the road and realize that they weren't getting everything from the landlord that they had anticipated, and then they see large upfront costs. You're talking $25,000, $50,000 in additional costs that they could never have foreseen because they didn't consult an architect or contractor. So generally, when I'm doing any kind of tenant representation, I try to insist that they engage somebody else to kind of look at the project and give them an assessment from an outsider's perspective and not listen necessarily to just what the landlord is explaining to them what the space may need.
Right. Yeah, that's good advice because you're going to give them legal advice on the lease, but if you need someone else that's doing that design, doing that build, that can come in and let them know, hey, that $50 a foot's not going to cut it, right? You said it might be.
And when we give them these budgets, we usually establish all the way from the construction to the FF&E, so they get a good picture of where they are. A lot of them underestimate the FF&E cost in the project.
What's the short and long-term timelines that you've seen for some of these build-outs to take from the time that you have a design?
The biggest issue is the permitting, and especially in the city of Atlanta, it's becoming beyond comprehension, especially with the health department and so forth. So you're having to allow at least 4 months for design and permitting.
Okay.
3 to 4 months minimum.
And then your build out.
And the build out is another 120 days to 150 days. And if you're doing from ground up, you're looking at 180 days plus.
Okay. Well, I know a lot of cities are having troubles getting the permitting done quickly. Well, stay tuned. We're going to have more on the restaurant industry, some more tips for landlords and tenants, investors, and operators. I'm Michael Bull. This is the Commercial Real Estate Show. We'll be right back. The Commercial Real Estate Show is brought to you in part by your friends at Bull Realty. When your business requires proven performance, visit bullrealty.com or call 800-408-BULL. Welcome back to the Commercial Real Estate Show. I'm Michael Bull. Today we're talking about the restaurant industry. My guests are Tony Akley with Restaurants Consulting Group and John Akley with Akley Law Group. And guys, we're talking about some of the trends that we're seeing in the industry. And one of the trends I'm curious to ask you guys about is kind of the size of restaurants. What are you seeing there? Are they getting larger? Are they getting smaller? Or?
Mostly getting smaller due to the increasing cost of real estate as well as construction. And I find that the most effective square footage lately is going to be between 3,000 and 4,000 square feet. Anything larger than that has to be a national chain that depending on volume all day long to make it.
Right. Well, it's nice too, I think, when you go into a restaurant or a club or something and it looks busy, right?
That's right.
I know there's a restaurant near here that you go in and it's so cavernous that, it never looks busy. It never looks happening, right?
That's right.
And what about design trends? It seems like some of the restaurants I go into are pretty hip. They're pretty cool. What are some of the newest trends there?
The trends for this year is continuing to be the hard surfaces, concrete walls, unfinished ceilings, conduits showing in the ceilings. But you have to soften that with the fabrics and wall treatments and things like that. But at the same time, we see in a trend coming back on limited basis is the white tablecloth trends is coming back because of the older generation is looking for a quieter place that can sit down and enjoy it, even though there's a lot of restaurants now with the wood and the sustainable material are still also trendy for the younger generation with wood tabletops and wood treatment on the walls. So I think it's going to continue for the next couple of years.
Okay. And if you're talking to a landlord of a retail center and he's looking at the design and construction for a restaurant, what advice would you give him in that regard as far as either design or construction or the process?
As far as the...
What could he watch out for? Should he have his own architect involved or his own?
I think if they're doing from ground up new construction, they need to consult with somebody who knows about restaurants to allow for the restaurant tenant to have the amenities that needed for the restaurant to be successful.
And John, what about for tenants regarding the new space? What are some tips you'd give them?
I think it's very important that they find someone that knows restaurant operation if they don't know it themselves. When they're looking at legal representation for negotiating their lease, having someone that understands their restaurant and their business model is going to be a huge help for them. In some of the spaces that I've worked with, people want to do open fire cooking, but if you're in a mixed use development, you can't do that, so it completely changes their concept after they've gotten into the lease stage. You need to look at the use provision, also the subletting and assignment for your exit strategy. It's just really depending on how you see your business and envision it growing in the years to come, and how you're going to deal with that once you're actually in the situation.
Right, so that gives them the flexibility, right? So
Exactly.
if that concept gets tired after a while and they've signed a 10-year lease, they've got some flexibility. And I love your tip there as far as finding the right attorney. I mean, I don't know how many attorneys are like you that have such experience in the restaurant industry, but I think some clients will see that they're doing a retail lease and they get their buddy they know it's an attorney, or they're doing an office lease and they get their buddy who's not even a real estate attorney sometimes, and then we're having to push back and be polite. But hey, I know you went to college with the guy, but you know what, he doesn't specialize in retail restaurants, so you really need to find someone else.
Yeah, or even they go and they find a litigation attorney that handled their divorce or their personal injury claim.
Yeah.
And
we love attorneys, but there's a lot of smart attorneys, and they realize they'll refer them, and they want them represented by someone who does it every day.
Exactly.
That's true.
I think I want to add also regarding the trends. I think the trends for the next few years is going to be also the increased dining at bar dining. So
Bar
people
dining,
like
yeah.
to sit at the bar and eat instead
I
of
like to sit at the bar and eat. Well, gentlemen, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate
welcome.
it.
Thank you.
All right. And thank you for joining us out there on the 32 stations on iTunes and on YouTube. And be sure and join us next week. We'll have another great show. And until next week, be sure that you always lead, learn, and laugh, and join us for the Commercial Real Estate Show. The Commercial Real Estate Show is brought to you by Bull Realty, commercial real estate asset and occupancy solutions. Visit bullrealty.com. CCIM Institute, commercial real estate's global standard for professional achievement. Visit ccim.com/CRE show. Xceligent, providing verified commercial real estate information across the United States. Visit xceligent.com.